We will bring some of those headlines to you later on, but what we're looking at now is some pictures, some live pictures of what happened late last night. France, of course, has declared a national state of emergency. There'll be tightened borders after at least 120 people were killed in a night of gun and bomb attacks in Paris.
Tonight, at least 140 people dead and hundreds injured in horrifying coordinated nighttime attacks in Paris. The victims killed in explosions and shootings at 6 different places in the French capital.
25 people in a room, all stacked, one against the other.
And world leaders unite in condemning the violence, showing solidarity with France.
This is an attack on all of humanity and the universal values that we share.
This is SBS World News with Ellie Laing.
Good evening. Tonight we bring you special coverage from Paris and from around the world as the French capital responds to a coordinated assault. At least 140 people have been killed and around 200 injured in a series of explosions and shootings. It began when gunmen killed people dining out on a busy Friday night at several different locations. The city has already been shaken by terrorism, 5 attacks this year, including the deadly Charlie Hebdo shooting. The French president has now declared a nationwide state of emergency. Ricardo Gonsalves joins me for the details. And Ricardo, in the worst incident, over 100 people died.
Yes, Lily, and at least 120 people were trapped in a hostage situation in the Bataclan concert hall in the city's east. 4 gunmen first took hostages and then fired on people at a music concert.
On a night of horrific violence and death, what took place here was by far the most chilling. This, the moment French special forces stormed the Bataclan concert hall. More than 100 people at a rock concert were taken hostage by gunmen, who then opened fire.
I saw 2 young men, no older than 25, with Kalashnikovs. They told us to lie down. There was one who kept gesturing for us to get down. We all lay down. The whole room lay down. I was completely under the other people, and they kept shooting.
We managed to escape through a door that was right on the stage, and we hid there for 2 hours. 25 people in a room, all stacked, one against the other, crouching and hearing Kalashnikov shots. It was as if people were being tortured. They were hurt because they were being shot.
Music fans were in the Parisian theatre to see Californian rock band Eagles of Death Metal when the shooting started.
The whole band heard the gunshots before they saw anything and stopped playing, hit the deck, and kind of went backstage and exited as fast as they could.
Those inside say 3 attackers calmly killed people one by one. 60 people escaped by being pulled onto the roof and into a nearby apartment. Other survivors were brought out by police.
When I went on the streets, I've seen 20 to 25 bodies lying on the floor, and people were very badly injured, gunshot wounds.
The Pompidou Hospital in central Paris was stretched to its limit. More than 60 seriously injured were admitted in just 3 hours.
We received all these patients, and we tried to save some. We tried to take care of all, and it was an awful night.
French President François Hollande has vowed to catch those behind the attacks.
Many people have been injured, some seriously, some in shock after what they went through. So we wanted to be here, by the side of all those who saw horrible things, to tell them that we will fight back. We will deal with the perpetrators without mercy.
3 of the gunmen inside the theatre were killed by their own explosive vests. A 4th was shot dead by security forces. Dale Owens, SBS World News.
OK, Mairead Dundas from the France 24 network joins us now live from the Bataclan Theatre. Mairead, Paris and the whole of France has woken up to another spate of bloody and coordinated attacks. So what's the mood there?
Well, yes, indeed. It's the morning after a night of horror. That's the only way to describe the events of last night. And the mood on the streets is a feeling of shock. It's palpable, from the cafe owners to the taxi drivers to the emergency services I've been speaking to over the last 12 hours. There's an overwhelming feeling of surely not again. It is, of course, less than 12 months since the Charlie Hebdo attack, several hundred metres from where I'm standing right now. We know that the gravity of the numbers is what is shocking the French public so much. More than 100 people perhaps in the one venue of the Bataclan concert hall. We know that a certain Hobart woman, Emma Parkinson, is among those injured. She's being treated in a Paris hospital. I spent some of my night at the Georges Pompidou Hospital, where we saw distraught family. We also saw overworked doctors. The head of emergency services there told me that he'd worked in war zones in Afghanistan and he'd never seen a carnage like that.
Mairead, a state of emergency has been declared. So what's next for a city under siege?
Well, it's very rare for a French president to declare a state of emergency. The last time was in 2005 after the death of 2 teenagers, which was followed by riots. What we do know now is that under a state of emergency, that the authorities can impose an entire lockdown of a neighbourhood. They can impose curfews and restrictions on the movement of people and traffic. We know that today, Saturday, museums and pools and gyms will be closed here in the capital. School outings have been cancelled, and the French president will be holding a series of emergency meetings. He's cancelled his G20 visit to Turkey, and we also know that on their minds of the government leaders is the COP21 climate conference in just over 2 weeks. More than 80 heads of state expected here. It was already a security nightmare. We can only imagine the extra measures that will now be taken.
OK, Mairead Dundas from France 24 Network, appreciate your time. Now, most of the attacks happened in the eastern part of the city, away from the Eiffel Tower and about a 15-minute walk northeast of the Notre Dame Cathedral. It's a popular area for restaurants and nightlife, which saw the bulk of the attacks. The biggest happened inside the Bataclan concert venue during a heavy metal music performance. Across the city, about 40 kilometres away, suicide bombers also targeted an area immediately outside the Stade de France during an international football match.
It began as a game like any other, a France versus Germany friendly. The first explosion drew cheers as though it was a firecracker, but then this.
On disait qu'en fait ça a pété une fois et 10-15 minutes plus tard ça pète encore, ça fait pam pam. Deuxième explosion Stade de France. Deuxième explosion, courez, courez.
Outside, this amateur video points to panic among some. Still, the match continued till the end, but alarm was growing as word spread of attacks elsewhere.
On pensait que c'était juste des bombes agricoles, après il y a eu des rumeurs, on a entendu parler de fusillades. Là c'est très confus à l'intérieur du stade. Il y a eu...
Unaware these were suicide bombings, thousands huddled uncertainly on the pitch. Then the mass exodus began, and fears for relatives mounted. These were the scenes outside a bar, La Belle Equipe, in the 11th area of central Paris. Carnage too at a Cambodian restaurant, La Petite Cambodge, in the 10th district.
I was holding a woman's arm next to me. And when I suddenly started to process what was happening, was asking around if people were okay, and I realised that she had been fatally wounded. She had been shot in the chest.
A night of horror, but also of a community rallying round. Passers-by rushing to help with makeshift covers. Others heeding warnings by radio stations to stay indoors, but also help those caught in the streets toss down sheets from their apartment windows. President Hollande, who'd been at the football game but was quickly whisked away, announced a state of emergency, last seen during the 2005 Paris riots. Until today, this year's most traumatic event was the Charlie Hebdo massacre, Paris on high alert ever since.
Nous avons, sur ma décision, mobilisé toutes les forces possibles pour qu'il puisse y avoir la neutralisation des terroristes et la mise en sécurité de tous les quartiers qui peuvent être concernés. La seconde décision que j'ai prise, c'est la fermeture des frontières.
His office later clarifying there'd be border checks rather than closures, as the City of Light, once again this year, fell under the heaviest darkness. Rena Sarumpaet, SBS World News.
And a little earlier I spoke with Richelle Harrison, who's an Australian journalist working in Paris. She was singing at a venue close to where a restaurant and bar were attacked and about 15 minutes from the Bataclan concert hall. I began by asking how she heard about the attacks.
We were on stage and I had my phone with me on stage and I just saw a breaking news alert pop up just as we were wrapping up the first set. And stepped off stage rather, and heard the terrible news, and at that point, there were the manager of the bar said, you know, there's a lockdown, you know, no one is allowed in, no one is allowed out.
Richelle, how were you able to get home from the area?
It was just very weird because, you know, a Friday night in Paris, you know, it's like anywhere, it's people are out and having a good time. It's the weekend, and the streets were completely deserted, and all you could hear were sirens, and yeah, it was just a very eerie feeling. And we were able to drive home, which is sort of in the opposite direction from where the attacks happened. And even if we tried to kind of go down towards where the attacks had taken place, like I don't think we would have been allowed through. I think that the streets were on lockdown, they were blocked and everything.
Can you describe the part of Paris you were at tonight?
Both the 10th and the 11th arrondissement are very, they're very what you would call bobo, which means bourgeois bohème. It's kind of, it's very young. It's lots of young Parisians, very local vibe. All of these places, the Carillon, the Petit Cambodge restaurant, the Bataclan, I've been to all of these places many, many times, and you know they're very much much loved by Parisians and by young Parisians. So it's just crazy to think that that they were targeted this evening.
Just finally, what kind of an impact do you think this will have on how secure the people of Paris feel, especially coming just 10 months after the attack on the headquarters of Charlie Hebdo?
Well, I think that for a lot of people here, the Charlie Hebdo attacks were just so huge, and I don't think that anyone thought this could happen, something like this could happen again. And that is kind of what I was saying, and what I heard a lot of people say was, I can't believe this is happening again. So there's shock that I guess that it has happened again. And not only that, it's much worse. As for, how people are feeling right now, I guess, we're kind of all asking the question. After Charlie Hebdo, we thought security was tightened. There was, this whole security plan in place. And what happened? What happened there? What went wrong?
That's Australian journalist Richelle Harrison there. Well, the reaction from world leaders has been one of outrage and solidarity with France, and there have been spontaneous displays from people around the globe.
It was a symbolic use of light in one of the world's darkest moments that said so much. The rebuilt World Trade Center in the US lit up in French colours. And the blue, white and red display beamed onto buildings all over the world. Gestures reinforced with these words from the American president.
Once again, we've seen an outrageous attempt to terrorise innocent civilians. This is an attack not just on Paris, it's an attack not just on the people of France, but this is an attack on all of humanity and the universal values that we share.
Obama says the US will do whatever it takes to bring the attackers to justice.
France is our oldest ally. The French people have stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States time and again. And we want to be very clear that we stand together with them in the fight against terrorism and extremism.
And Western leaders know that fight exists not only in France, but in their own countries. So while pledging their support, leaders were reassessing and bolstering their security at home.
I've been speaking with our national security team to ensure that everything is being done to keep people safe.
The UK Prime Minister tweeted his shock, saying our thoughts and prayers are with the French and we will do whatever we can to help. In a statement, Russia also condemned the killings, declaring it too was ready to offer assistance to investigate these terrorist crimes. Monitoring travel will be key to that investigation, so French neighbour Belgium has reinforced its borders with increased checks on road, rail and air arrivals from France. Further afield, there was solidarity from Venezuela, China, Cuba and Turkey.
It is obvious that the explosions near the National Stadium, where a France-German friendly soccer game was underway, targets peace and security of the people of both countries. The hostage situation in a concert hall cannot be explained with any humanitarian and moral value.
The United Nations, the Western Defence Alliance NATO and the EU have also pledged support. Ellie Laing, SBS World News.
Well, authorities here have confirmed that one Australian has been injured in the violence. The victim is reportedly 19-year-old Hobart woman Emma Parkinson. She's in hospital. Her conditions are known, but she is believed to have been among the victims inside the concert hall. Now, SBS reporter Ellie Laing joins us now live from Sydney's Martin Place. Ellie, there are plans for a candlelight vigil there tonight.
There are, Ricardo, and it gets underway in about 15 minutes' time. And it follows a number of other similar vigils that have already been held and are continuing to be held around the world. As you can see behind me, the crowd is starting to build. It's expected about 1,000 people may be here tonight, braving the rain to stand as one with France, its people, and of course the victims of today's terror attacks. The crowd will be lit up by candlelight. Those candles will be placed on the stage down there behind me. I'm told the French Consul General will be here tonight. The French national anthem will be sung and a minute's silence will be observed. Just in the last few minutes, we've spoken to a number of people who've come out here tonight, and here's a little of how they're feeling.
I do care, and having gone through 9/11 back home at a younger age, I didn't really understand. Now it's a whole nother level.
It's kind of frustrating to be away from from Paris, and I'm here to meet other people with who I can communicate.
I'm pretty sure we're all here for the same reason, just to show support and to make a statement in a way to say that we want it can't happen. It can't keep happening.
The New South Wales Premier Mike Baird says he's determined to get a French flag on top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and he says if he can't find one, they will have one made. He has arranged, though, to have the Opera House lit up in blue, white and red, and that's expected to happen at about 9 o'clock tonight. Ricardo?
OK, SBS reporter Ellie Laing there reporting live from Sydney's Martin Place. Thank you. Well, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has joined world leaders in condemning the attacks. Mr Turnbull is on his way to Turkey for the G20 summit. He was in Berlin meeting German Chancellor Angela Merkel when news of the Paris attacks broke. And SBS Europe correspondent Brett Mason was travelling with the Prime Minister.
Events in Paris have sent shockwaves across Europe, more so given that world leaders are beginning to gather here ahead of this weekend's G20 summit in Turkey. Among those, Malcolm Turnbull, the Australian Prime Minister. He was meeting with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, but that visit has now been overshadowed by the devastating loss of life in Paris. The French President Francois Hollande has cancelled his planned visit to Turkey. Malcolm Turnbull says that Australians' thoughts, prayers and resolute solidarity are with the people of France as they respond to the brutal terrorist attacks that have taken place in Paris.
Paris, France, the home of freedom, has been assaulted by terrorists determined to attack and suppress freedom, not just in France but throughout the world. This is an attack, as President Obama has said, on all humanity. On behalf of the Australian people I extend our deep sympathy to the people of France. Our thoughts and prayers are with them.
Top of the agenda at the G20 summit is the ongoing conflict in Syria. There are still high hopes that America and Russia may be able to negotiate some form of transition of power, ending some nearly 5 years of conflict. But given the events of the last 24 hours, that agenda is likely to be thrown out the window.
Brett Mason there and Lee Lin. We will have more news about the Paris attacks later in the bulletin and updates throughout the evening here on SBS.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. Coming up after the break, Foreign Minister Julie Bishop condemns the Paris attacks. And crowds gather here and around the world in solidarity with Paris. Continuing with our special coverage of the series of deadly terror attacks in Paris. At least 140 people have been killed and around 200 injured in a series of explosions and shootings. It began when gunmen killed people dining out on a busy Friday night at several different locations. The city has already been shaken by terrorism. 5 attacks this year, including the deadly Charlie Hebdo shooting. The French president has now declared a nationwide state of emergency. And we turn now to the Australian response and to Catherine McGrath for that. Catherine, what is the official reaction?
Well, Lee Lin, as we heard earlier, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has been in Berlin, and from there, overnight in the early hours of the morning in Berlin, he was briefed directly by the head of ASIO, the head of the AFP, and he spoke to his senior ministers in Australia. The word from Australian officials and from the Foreign Minister to Australians who are worried about their family in France is to contact consular officials here, and for Australians in France to remain inside their hotels to follow directions from the French government because there is a state of emergency in Paris. Shock and condemnation from Australia as well.
This is indeed a Black Friday for France and for the world.
Foreign Minister Julie Bishop says there are 2,500 Australians registered in France, but the real number is much higher. One Australian was injured, another caught up in the terror did contact the emergency consular line and was found safe.
Australians in Paris should stay where they are, ensure that they're safe. Please contact the consular number so that we know where they are and we can maintain a register of Australians in Paris at this time.
The 24-hour consular emergency number is 1300 555 135 or from overseas 612 6261 3305.
Our thoughts are with the victims of this shocking attack, their friends, their families, and of course all of the people of France.
We now live in a global world, and events that happen anywhere do have an impact on all of us.
Governor-General Sir Peter Cosgrove condemned the loss of life. Our two nations have a long history of standing together in times of crisis. We do so again today, he said in a statement.
The most tragic event that happened in France in the past 40 or 50 years, we shall not, give up.
Australian security officials are assessing any local impact of the attack, but at this stage there's no change to Australia's threat level.
It certainly has all the hallmarks of the terrorist attacks that we've seen in recent times by ISIL, Daesh and similar organisations.
With the UN's crucial climate change conference soon to begin in Paris, French Ambassador Christophe Lecourtier has urged countries to support it, thereby supporting France.
When the Paris conference will open in about 2 weeks from now, we shall send to the world, we will send a message of civilization, saying that we are together building a better world.
Australia has offered all assistance to France should it be needed. And Lee Lin, the Australian officials here are monitoring events very closely. The acting Prime Minister is the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Truss. The Foreign Minister and the Attorney General are all having updated briefings and liaising through conversations with the Prime Minister overseas. The Australian threat level remains unchanged at high, and the Australian Government will be updating us throughout the night and the morning, Lee Lin.
It's Ricardo here, Catherine McGrath there reporting from Canberra. We go from Canberra now back to France and we cross with CNN correspondent Fred Pleitgen, who is joining us from the restaurant district. Fred, there's still no claim of responsibility, so what are authorities saying about how the gunmen were able to mount this attack?
Earlier, I spoke with Tobias Feakin, a defence analyst at the Strategic Policy Institute in Canberra, and I began by asking him which group appeared to be behind these attacks in Paris.
Well, we simply don't know who has actually carried out these attacks currently. Obviously, all indicators are beginning to lead us towards expectations that it's some sort of Islamist jihadist group. But as yet, we don't actually know. Absolutely, on social media, you're seeing that ISIS fanboys, so-called ISIS supporters online are enjoying trying to claim responsibility for it. But similar things happened around the Charlie Hebdo attack in January 2015. And we later found out that was Al-Qaeda and the Arabian Peninsula who had instigated that particular attack. So, you know, it's always wise to be fairly cautious in terms of appropriating who it was. So in the course of time, we'll find out who these individuals were, what their motivations were and where they came from.
It's less than a year since Charlie Hebdo. Why does France keep being singled out?
Well, currently there are more foreign fighters within Syria and Iraq who are of French nationality, well over 1,000 current numbers rest at. So they clearly have an issue with French nationals flowing into that combat zone. There is, to be frank, a brewing, not even undercurrent of far right-wing extremism in that country, and this is one of the consequences of this attack. Is Marine Le Pen of the Front National party in France has been growing in support and really playing heavily on not only certain terrorism issues but also influx of migration into France, and you know how she plays her political cards, if you like, after this event will have serious repercussions.
What does this mean for international security? Are we likely to see very much tightened security globally?
Absolutely. I think in the wake of any particular terrorist attack, you will always see an uptick and tightening of security. For example, with the downing of the Russian aircraft flying out of Egypt, certainly travelling through airports, there's a notable increased level of security. We've already seen announcements from various big US and other European cities increasing their security levels also. And I mean that's standard in a situation like this, in order that they are prepared should there be anyone either wanting to mimic what's just occurred or if there were indeed any further attacks planned. So absolutely, I mean I think anyone wherever they are in the world can expect increased security over the coming weeks around built up areas, you know, to try and avert a similar kind of tragedy elsewhere.
A third man has been charged over the shooting death of police worker Curtis Chung in October. The 22-year-old did not apply for bail this morning and will remain behind bars. Police say further charges and arrests are expected.